Backpacking had always been our thing. My best friend, Dylan, and I loved the challenge of pushing ourselves into the wild, relying on only what we could carry. When he suggested the Mark Twain National Forest for a 5-day trip, I was all in. It was known for its dense woods, winding trails, and rugged beauty. It was also remote, which was exactly what we wanted. The first 2 days were as close to perfect as you could imagine. The weather was crisp, the skies clear, and the trails quiet. We hiked through towering oak and hickory forests, stopping to filter water from streams and eat trail mix by rocky outcroppings. Nights were spent around a small fire, joking about our past trips and planning the ones to come. We crossed paths with a few hikers along the way, including a couple from Kansas City who warned us about the unpredictable terrain further ahead. But their tone was friendly, and we didn't think much of it. On the third day, the forest's mood began to shift. We were halfway up a narrow trail when we spotted a group of 3 men ahead. They were armed, each carrying rifles slung over their shoulders, but hunting wasn't unusual out here. They waved as we approached, and we exchanged pleasantries. "You boys camping out here long?" one of them asked. He had a wiry build, a sunburned face, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Couple more days," Dylan replied, adjusting the straps of his pack. "Beautiful spot, isn't it?" Another chimed in, gesturing to the dense forest around us. "Sure is," I said, forcing a smile. They asked about our route, their tone casual, but something about their questions felt off. They lingered too long on details, like where we were camping and whether we'd seen anyone else nearby. When they finally moved on, Dylan nudged me. "You feel that?" "Yeah," I admitted, glancing back at their retreating figures. That night, we set up camp near a small clearing. The sky was a deep indigo, stars flickering through gaps in the canopy. But the unease from earlier hadn't left me. Dylan seemed fine, though, chatting as he boiled water for dinner. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to a sound that froze me in place. A scream. It wasn't the kind of scream you hear on roller coasters or in movies. It was raw, desperate, and terrifying. I sat up, my heart pounding. "Dylan, wake up!" He groaned, but the second scream jolted him upright. "What the hell?" he whispered, fumbling for his flashlight. Then came the gunshots. 3 quick blasts echoed through the forest, followed by shouting, voices overlapping in a chaotic frenzy. The night, which had been so still moments before, was now alive with the sounds of terror. "We need to go," I said, already stuffing essentials into my pack. "Go where?" Dylan asked, his voice shaky. "Anywhere but here." We doused the fire and moved as quickly and quietly as we could, guided only by the faint beam of Dylan's flashlight. The shouting continued, though it seemed to grow fainter as we moved deeper into the woods. After about half an hour, we stopped to catch our breath. That's when we saw it. A backpack, torn open and abandoned at the base of a tree. Scattered around it were items that belonged to someone else. A smashed water bottle, a flannel shirt soaked with blood. "What the hell is going on?" Dylan muttered, his voice barely audible. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and movement. We stumbled through the woods, relying on instinct and luck to guide us. Several times we heard footsteps nearby, quick and deliberate, not the aimless wandering of a lost camper. Once we even saw the faint glow of flashlights in the distance, bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps in the dark. We found a rocky outcrop and huddled beneath it, too terrified to keep moving. The forest seemed alive with noises, branches snapping, leaves rustling, the occasional distant shout. Neither of us dared to speak. When dawn broke, the forest felt no safer. Exhausted and hungry, we decided to find the nearest road, even if it meant leaving the trail entirely. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold, a small clearing with a hastily abandoned campsite. The ground was littered with spent shell casings, and the remnants of a fire still smoldered. Near the edge of the clearing was something even worse, a crude map scrawled on a piece of paper, pinned to a tree with a knife. Several areas were marked with X's, and one of them was uncomfortably close to where we had camped the night before. The final stretch of our escape was a desperate sprint. We heard voices again, closer this time, and the adrenaline drove us forward. When we finally reached a gravel road, I felt like I could collapse from relief. A pickup truck appeared in the distance, its driver skidding to a stop when we waved him down. He didn't ask many questions, just took one look at our faces and told us to get in. At the nearest ranger station, we told our story. The rangers seemed skeptical at first, but when they heard about the screams, the gunshots, and the map, their expressions turned grim. "We'll investigate," one of them said, though the tone didn't inspire much confidence. As we left, another ranger pulled us aside. "You boys are lucky you got out when you did," he said. "This forest has seen its share of trouble over the years. Some things you just don't want to stick around for." I haven't been backpacking since. I still don't know who those men were or what they were doing in the woods that night. And I don't think I want to know. What I do know is this. The forest may be beautiful, but it's also vast, untamed, and full of secrets. Some of those secrets are better left undisturbed. If this is your first time here, welcome. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to stay updated with our spine-chilling stories. Your support means the world to us. Share these thrilling tales with your friends and family. Thanks for being a part of our journey. I'd been planning the trip for weeks, a solo hike through the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I'm not exactly an adrenaline junkie, but there's something about the solitude of the woods that clears my head. Away from the constant hum of emails and phone notifications, I can breathe, think, and just be. The weather couldn't have been better that morning. The late spring air was cool but not cold, with the kind of sunlight that filters through the trees in golden beams. My route was simple, a 2-day trek following the Middle Prong Trail to Indian Flat Falls, then looping back around on Lynn Camp Prong Trail. It wasn't the most remote path, but it promised beautiful views, dense woods, and a few hours without another soul in sight. The first few hours were blissful. The trail followed a gentle incline alongside a rushing creek, its water so clear you could see the smooth rocks at the bottom. Birds called to one another in the canopy above, and the occasional rustle of leaves reminded me that I wasn't entirely alone, just part of a larger, natural world. Around midday, I reached a clearing with a view of the valley below. I dropped my pack, ate an apple, and leaned back against a boulder, feeling the sun warm my face. I could have stayed there forever, but the falls were still a couple of miles away, and I wanted to set up camp before dusk. That's when I saw it. A small scrap of fabric caught on a branch at the edge of the clearing. At first, it seemed like nothing. People hike this trail all the time. It wasn't unusual to find a lost bandana or piece of clothing. But as I got closer, I noticed the fabric was stained, dark brown, like old blood. I told myself it was probably just mud or tree sap, but my stomach churned anyway. I almost left it there, but curiosity got the better of me. I tugged it free and saw that it wasn't just a scrap. It was part of a shirt sleeve, torn clean at the seams. I folded it and stuffed it into my pocket, telling myself it wasn't my business. People lose things in the woods all the time. The trail grew narrower as I continued toward the falls. The dense undergrowth closed in on both sides, and the cheerful sound of the creek faded until the only noises were my own footsteps and the occasional snap of a twig. That's when I noticed it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. It started with the smell, something faint but sour, like wet metal or decaying leaves. I tried to ignore it, but the sensation that followed was harder to brush off. It was the prickling awareness of being watched. Every time I stopped to listen, the woods fell utterly silent, as if holding its breath. But as soon as I moved again, the faintest rustle would follow, like a shadow keeping pace with my steps. By the time I reached the falls, the unease was hard to shake. The cascade was stunning, tumbling over mossy rocks into a pool that shimmered in the fading light. But the serenity I'd expected didn't come. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing just beyond the tree line. I forced myself to focus. I needed to set up camp before it got dark, and the flat area near the falls was perfect. My tent went up quickly, and I built a small fire to chase away the chill creeping into the air. As I ate my dinner, simple trail mix and a protein bar, I tried to convince myself I was just jumpy. The woods can play tricks on you, especially when you're alone. The night brought no relief. I woke up sometime around midnight, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. The fire had burned down to embers, casting just enough light to see the edges of my campsite. And then I heard it. A faint crunch of leaves, deliberate and slow, coming from the direction of the falls. I held my breath, straining to hear past the blood rushing in my ears. The sound came again, closer this time. It wasn't an animal, I knew that much. It was the deliberate weight of a person. "Hello?" I called, trying to keep the quiver out of my voice. No answer, just the whisper of movement now circling around the edge of the campsite. I don't know how long I sat there, gripping the handle of my pocket knife and staring into the darkness. At some point, the noises stopped, but the fear didn't. When dawn finally broke, I packed up in record time, deciding to cut the trip short and head back to the trailhead. As I retraced my steps, the woods felt different, darker despite the morning light. The usual chirping of birds was absent, replaced by a heavy, oppressive quiet. About a mile from the campsite, I saw it. A small pile of stones stacked neatly in the center of the trail. I don't know how I missed it on the way in, but it hadn't been there before. By the time I reached the parking lot, my nerves were frayed. My car was the only one there, just as it had been when I arrived. I threw my pack into the back seat and got in, locking the doors before starting the engine. I didn't look back as I pulled onto the road, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me until I was miles away. A week later, I saw a news report about a missing hiker in the Smokies. The picture on the screen was a young man, mid-20s, with an easy smile and a baseball cap. They said he'd last been seen on the same trail I'd hiked, around the same time. My stomach sank as I remembered the torn sleeve in my pocket. I never told anyone about what I'd found or heard out there. The park rangers would have written it off as paranoia or a coincidence, and maybe they'd be right. But every now and then, I think about that pile of stones and the noises in the dark, and I wonder, what if I hadn't left when I did? I wasn't thrilled about spending the weekend in the middle of nowhere, but when Mark invited us to his family's cabin in the woods, I couldn't say no. It had been years since our group of college friends had hung out together, and honestly, I missed them. The cabin was in northern Georgia, near Lake Blue Ridge. It was rustic but cozy, tucked into the woods with a wraparound porch that creaked with every step. After the 4-hour drive from Atlanta, we were all eager to stretch our legs, so after unpacking, someone suggested we walk down to the river. "Let's check out the water," Emma said, pulling her hair into a ponytail. She always had this adventurous streak that dragged the rest of us along, whether we wanted to or not. The trail was beautiful. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, and the air smelled like pine and earth. We were laughing, catching up on each other's lives as we walked single file along the narrow path. About 10 minutes into the hike, we saw it, a large, dark shape lying just off the trail. It was wrapped in thick black polyethylene, tightly secured with duct tape. It didn't belong there, and none of us could look away. "What the hell is that?" Mark asked, stopping dead in his tracks. "It looks like," Emma started, then trailed off. She stepped closer, squinting at the thing. "Do you think it's—" I didn't want her to finish that sentence. Jake, always the joker, tried to lighten the mood. "Probably just someone dumping an old couch. People are lazy like that." But his voice cracked, betraying his unease. I don't know what possessed me, but I stepped closer. The shape was too human. The way the plastic hugged its form, broad shoulders, a tapering at one end like legs, it made my stomach churn. Before anyone could do more, a voice boomed from the trees. "Hey, that's ours!" We all jumped. 2 men emerged from the woods, their faces shaded by caps pulled low over their eyes. One of them was holding an axe casually at his side, though there was nothing casual about the way he glared at us. "You need to leave," the other man said. His voice was low and firm, with an edge that left no room for argument. "We didn't mean to," Emma started, but he cut her off. "Then go," he said. My heart was pounding as we turned and walked back the way we'd come, our conversation from earlier forgotten. No one said a word until we were out of earshot, and even then, it was in whispers. "That was messed up," Jake finally said. "It looked like a body," Sarah whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "Tell me I'm not crazy." "You're not crazy," I said. "It looked like one to me, too." The cabin felt less cozy when we got back. Mark locked the door and Sarah checked the windows. No one said it, but we were all thinking the same thing. Were those guys following us? As the sun started to set, I caught movement outside through the kitchen window. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling the trees, but then I saw it, a figure standing near the edge of the woods. "Guys," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone's out there." They crowded around the window, and sure enough, another figure appeared. They were too far away to make out their faces, but they weren't hiding. They wanted us to know they were there. Panic set in fast. Jake wanted to call the police, but we had no signal this deep in the woods. Mark thought we should just stay inside and wait it out, but Sarah and Emma were already packing their bags. "We can't stay here," Emma said. "If they wanted to hurt us, they wouldn't just stand there. They're waiting for us to panic." "Well, it's working," Jake snapped. Then we heard it, a loud thud against the porch, followed by the sound of metal scraping against wood. It was enough to send us into motion. We grabbed our things and slipped out the back door, heading for the trail that would take us to the nearest town. Mark said it was only 2 miles away, but in the dark, it felt endless. The forest closed in around us as we ran. The only light came from Mark's flashlight, which bounced erratically as he led the way. My legs burned and my lungs felt like they might explode, but the fear of what was behind us kept me moving. Every now and then I'd hear something, footsteps crunching leaves, branches snapping, but when I turned to look, there was nothing. "We're almost there," Mark called back, though his voice sounded as scared as the rest of us felt. When we finally saw the lights of the town, I could have cried. We stumbled into the police station, breathless and shaking. Emma did most of the talking, explaining about the plastic-wrapped object, the men we encountered, and the figures outside the cabin. The officer on duty listened carefully, his expression growing darker with every word. He radioed for backup and told us to wait. A patrol was sent to the cabin. Hours later, the officers returned. Their grim expressions said it all before they even spoke. "Your story checks out," one of them said. "We found signs that someone had been in the cabin after you left. Drawers pulled out, furniture overturned, like they were searching for something." "What about the wrapped object?" Emma asked. The officer shook his head. "It wasn't there anymore, but we found blood near the spot where you said it was." My stomach turned. "And the men?" "They're gone," he said. "But we found clear evidence someone was following you. Tracks leading straight from the trail to the cabin and then toward town." Before we left, another officer pulled us aside. His tone was quiet but firm. "You're lucky you got out when you did," he said. "If you'd stayed any longer, I don't know if you'd have made it." We drove home in silence, the weight of his words sinking in. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling that we were part of something much darker than we realized.